What would you do if a dry well whispered secrets, spat out ancient gold, and lured armed strangers through a whiteout night? When a cursed ranch, a vanished owner, and a ruined mission point to a buried truth, do you climb down? Oh, the wind was on a razor slicing across the plains of Wyoming and finding every seam in my worn-out coat. It was the heart of a bitter January, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you question God's good sense. Every breath I took was a plume of white vapor, a fleeting ghost of my own life force snatched away by the unforgiving air. My horse, a stoic old gelding I called Silas, lowered his head against the gale, his mane crusted with ice. We were two weary souls trudging through an endless sea of white, looking for a place that existed more on a tattered piece of paper than on any map I knew. The place was called Blackwood Creek Ranch, a name far too grand for the ruin that awaited me. I'd acquired the deed in a dusty government office back in Cheyenne. Not with money, I hadn't a dollar to my name, but with a signature. The land was considered cursed, abandoned, worthless. Its previous owner, a man named Elias Thorne, had vanished into thin air 5 years prior. Before him, another family, the Carvers, had met a similarly mysterious end. The land was free for any man fool enough to claim it, and brave enough to face its ghosts. I was just that kind of fool. 3 months ago, my world had crumbled. The blight had taken my crops, the bank had taken my farm, and my beloved Sarah, seeing no future in my empty hands and haunted eyes, had taken our 2 children and gone back to her family in Ohio. She'd promised to return when I had something to offer, but the finality in her gaze felt like a headstone on the grave of our life together. This desolate ranch, this frozen patch of forgotten land, wasn't just my last chance. It was my only one. When I finally saw it huddled in a shallow valley, against a line of skeletal aspens, it was less a homestead and more a monument to decay. The cabin sagged its roof, a patchwork of hope and failure. The barn leaned at a precarious angle, as if tired of standing against the relentless wind. And in the center of the yard, a ring of stones marked the old well, its wooden cover choked with a thick blanket of snow. The first few days were a blur of misery and labor. I patched the roof with frozen sod and scavenged planks, sealed the windows with mud and straw, and spent every waking hour chopping wood to feed the insatiable appetite of the rusted stove. The cold was a physical presence, a predator that stalked the edges of my firelight, waiting for me to falter. But the most pressing problem was water. The nearby creek was frozen solid, a ribbon of impenetrable ice. My canteens were nearly empty. The well was my only hope. They told me it was dry as a bone for 20 years, the clerk in the land office had said with a pitying shake of his head. But desperation is a powerful motivator. On the 4th day, with a thirst that felt like sandpaper in my throat, I shoveled away the snow and ice from the well's cover. The wood was rotten, but it held. With a grunt, I heaved it aside and stared into the abyss. The darkness was absolute, smelling of cold stone and damp earth. There was no sound of water, no echo of life. My heart sank. Still, I had to be sure. I uncoiled the stiff frozen rope I'd found in the barn, tied it to the rusty bucket, and began lowering it into the blackness. The rope played out 10 feet, 20, then 30. I felt for the telltale slack that would signal it had hit bottom. Instead, I heard it. A deep, resonant scrape. It wasn't the sound of a bucket hitting dirt. It was metal on stone, a jarring, unnatural noise that had no business coming from a dry well. A tremor of unease, cold and sharp, ran down my spine. I stood there, hand on the rope, the wind howling around me, and listened. Silence. Had I imagined it, I pulled the rope up. It felt heavy. Too heavy. My muscles strained, the cold biting into my chapped hands. It wasn't the impossible weight of a full bucket, but it was far from empty. When the bucket finally emerged from the darkness rimmed with frost, I saw what lay inside. Water. Not much, maybe a few inches, but it was there. Crystal clear and so cold it seemed to steam in the frigid air. A wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. I wouldn't die of thirst. But as the water settled, my eyes caught a flicker of light from the bottom of the bucket. Something metallic, gleaming with a dull, buttery sheen against the galvanized steel. My fingers, numb with cold, fumbled as I reached into the icy water. The object was smooth and heavy and strangely warm, as if it held some internal heat. I pulled it out and laid it on my palm. It was a gold coin. Not an eagle or a double eagle like I'd seen a few times in my life. This was older, thicker, its edges worn smooth by time. One side bore the profile of a stern-faced man I didn't recognize, and the other was covered in symbols that looked like no alphabet I knew. It felt ancient, out of place, like a secret whispered from another time. I stared from the coin back to the well. If there was one, were there more? And if there was gold at the bottom of this well, maybe it wasn't a curse that had driven its previous owners away. Maybe it was greed. Just as I prepared to lower the bucket again to test my fortune one more time, a voice cut through the wind, sharp and clear. "I'd think twice about that if I were you, mister." I spun around, my hand instinctively going to the hilt of the hunting knife on my belt. A figure emerged from the swirling snow near the tree line, leading a horse. It was a woman wrapped in a thick wool coat and a fur-lined hat that covered most of her hair, which I could see was the color of iron filings. Her face was weathered but strong, her eyes a startlingly pale blue, and they missed nothing. She moved with a purpose that spoke of a life lived in this harsh land. "Don't get yourself in a lather," she said, her voice low and steady. She stopped a respectful distance away, her gaze fixed not on me but on the well, just offering a piece of neighborly advice. "Some things are best left buried." "And you are?" I asked, my own voice rough with disuse and suspicion. "Eleonora Vance. My place is over that ridge to the east," she said, nodding her head. "Folks call me Nora. I saw your smoke. Figured I'd see what kind of man was brave enough or foolish enough to take on the Thorn place." "Jedediah Stone," I replied, my hand still resting on my knife. "And a man's got to drink. The creek's frozen over." "I know," she said, her pale eyes finally meeting mine. "But that well has a history of taking more than it gives. Elias Thorn learned that lesson the hard way." The coin in my pocket suddenly felt heavier, its unnatural warmth a stark contrast to the bitter cold. "What happened to Thorn vanished," she said simply. "One day he was here wild-eyed and ranting about his fortune being made. The next he was gone. Left a full pot of coffee on the stove and his horse still in the stable. It was as if the ground itself swallowed him whole." The coin seemed to pulse with a faint heat against my leg. A nervous energy, a strange, exhilarating fear began to churn in my gut. Maybe he just moved on. A man has a right to seek his fortune elsewhere. Nora shook her head, a slow, deliberate motion. "Not Elias. He was a stubborn man tethered to this piece of land like it was his own soul. But something changed in him those last few weeks. Something that came from down there." She gestured to the well with her chin. "He started talking to himself. Not just mumbling, but having full-blown conversations, arguing with someone only he could see. Said the well was telling him secrets." A gust of wind tore across the yard, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible sound from the depths of the well. It wasn't the trickle of water. It was a soft dragging noise like cloth being pulled over rough stone. I froze, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. "What kind of secrets?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The kind that lead a man to ruin." She stepped closer, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small deerskin pouch. With deliberate movements, she untied the leather thong and tipped its contents into her gloved palm. Another gold coin, identical to mine. My breath hitched. "Where did you get that?" "Found it in my hen house a week after Elias disappeared," she said, her eyes dark with memory. "Buried under the dirt floor. My hens wouldn't go near that corner of the coop again. Acted like it was haunted. I've kept it ever since. A reminder." "A reminder of what?" "That this land doesn't give up its treasures easily," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And Elias Thorn wasn't the first. The Carver family lived here before him. They vanished too. Father, mother, 2 children. Gone overnight. The neighbors said Mr. Carver had been digging in that well for weeks, talking about finding an old settler's cache." I pulled my own coin from my pocket. The 2 pieces of gold seemed to drink in the flat gray winter light, their strange symbols seeming to writhe just at the edge of my vision. They were more than just coins. They were keys or warnings. "There are more," I heard myself say the words, feeling foreign in my own mouth. "Down there. I can feel them." A flicker of fear, genuine and deep, crossed Nora's face. She quickly put her coin away. "That's what he said," she whispered. "That's exactly what Elias Thorn said the day before he was gone." She backed away, pulling the collar of her coat tighter around her neck. "You're a fool if you stay here, Jedediah Stone. This place is a tomb waiting for a body." She turned and mounted her horse with a fluid, practiced motion. "There's a storm coming in from the north. A bad one. If you have any sense, you'll be gone before it hits." With that, she rode off, disappearing back into the swirling snow as silently as she had arrived, leaving me alone with the howling wind, the dark mouth of the well, and the heavy, warm secret in my pocket. Nora's warning echoed in my mind, but it was drowned out by the louder, more insistent voice of desperation. Leaving wasn't an option. Where would I go? Back to a life of aimless wandering, a failure in my own eyes and in the eyes of the woman I loved. No, this ranch, this well, this mystery, it was mine now. The storm she'd warned of was a physical manifestation of the one raging inside me. I had to know what was down there. The weight of the coin was a constant, tangible presence, a promise of wealth that could mend my broken life. It was a siren song, and I was a sailor too lost to resist its call. As the sky began to bruise with the colors of a winter dusk, I knew I couldn't wait. The approaching storm would soon make any descent impossible. I checked the knot of the rope on the well's stone rim, pulling with all my weight until my knuckles were white. It held firm. My stomach growled a hollow ache that I ignored. Food could wait. Answers couldn't. Swinging my legs over the edge, I began to walk my way down the icy stone wall. The world above shrank to a dwindling circle of gray light. The air grew still and intensely cold, the silence broken only by the scrape of my boots and my own ragged breathing. The well was deeper than I'd imagined, a straight, dark throat leading into the bowels of the earth. My boots finally touched down on something solid. It wasn't a pool of water, but a floor of loose, damp earth and rubble. It felt disturbed. Recently disturbed. I fumbled in my coat for the tin of matches I always carried. The first one sputtered and died in the damp air. The second one caught its tiny flame, a fragile bubble of light in the immense darkness. The matchlight revealed a scene of frantic, desperate work. The stone walls were scarred with fresh tool marks, chips, and gouges that showed where someone had been prying at the very foundations of the well. Elias Thorne. He hadn't just been drawing water. He'd been excavating. The flame licked at my fingertips, and I dropped it quickly, lighting another. In the renewed light, I saw them. Not just one or two, but dozens of gold coins were scattered across the dirt floor, winking at me like fallen stars. A fortune, more money than I had ever seen in my life. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of disbelief and triumph. But they weren't just scattered. They were arranged in a rough circle, as if marking a spot. In the center, the earth was mounded slightly. Dropping to my knees, I began to dig with my bare hands, the frozen dirt biting at my fingers. I didn't care. A frantic energy had seized me. My fingers struck something hard and wooden. A box, small, about the size of a family Bible, bound with iron straps. It was heavy, far too heavy for its size. I tucked the box securely inside my coat and began frantically gathering the coins, stuffing my pockets until they bulged, the weight of them a comforting burden. I worked by the fleeting light of one match after another, a race against the encroaching darkness. As I lit my final match, ready to climb back to the surface and my new life, its light fell upon something I hadn't seen before. Scratched crudely into the stone wall, low to the ground and half hidden by shadow, were words. A message from the grave. They are always watching. The coins are a lie. Real treasure in the old mission foundation. God help me. E.T. Elias Thorne. The match burned out, plunging me into absolute blackness, but the words were seared into my brain. My blood ran cold, a terrifying chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. The coins in my pocket suddenly felt like stones dragging me down. The box inside my coat felt like a block of ice against my chest. This wasn't a treasure hunt. It was a trap. I scrambled up the rope with a strength born of pure terror, my lungs burning, my mind reeling. When I hauled myself over the icy rim, the world had transformed. Night had fallen completely, and the first flakes of the promised storm were beginning to drift down from a starless sky. The wind had died down to an eerie, watchful silence. My hands trembling, I fumbled with my lantern, the oil sloshing as I finally got it lit. In its warm yellow glow, I examined the box. The wood was dark and ancient, but the hinges moved smoothly. I pried it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was not more gold but a journal. A thin leather-bound book, its pages filled with the spidery, frantic script of a man losing his mind. It was Elias Thorne's journal. I flipped to the last entry, written in a hand so shaky it was barely legible. To whoever finds this, my name is Elias Thorne. If you are reading this, I am already dead. Do not be fooled. The coins are not treasure. They are bait, a lure set in a trap that has stood for years. They use them to draw desperate men to this place. I figured it out too late. I know they have been watching me. They are waiting. The real treasure isn't gold. It's the truth. Proof of their crimes. It is hidden where they would never think to look. The foundation of the old Spanish mission 2 miles north by the frozen river. Look for the stone marked with a cross. But you must be careful. They know when the coins have been found. They're probably watching you now. A dry branch snapped in the darkness just beyond the ring of my lantern light. My head shot up, my heart leaping into my throat. Then another snap closer this time. I doused the lantern, plunging the yard into near-total darkness, my eyes struggling to adjust. I crouched low beside the well, listening, every nerve screaming. Footsteps. Not one person, but several. Moving slowly, deliberately through the skeletal trees that bordered the property. They weren't trying to be silent. They were closing a net. They knew I was here. They had been waiting. Sterling's warning, his final desperate plea, screamed in my mind. They are probably watching you now. I had to get away from the well, away from the open. The cabin was my only option. 30 yards of open ground stood between me and its dark, beckoning doorway. The coins in my pockets jingled softly with every tiny movement, a death knell in the profound silence. I began to move my body low to the ground, a shadow among shadows. The footsteps grew more distinct. 3 sets, I guessed, spreading out, flanking the cabin. These were not common drifters. They moved with the cold efficiency of predators. My hand closed around the heavy iron box in my coat. This was what they were after. Not the gold, but the truth. I reached the porch, the old wood groaning under my weight. The front door was ajar, a blacker rectangle in the darkness. Inside the cabin was a time capsule of Elias Thorne's last moments. A dirty coffee cup on the table. A coat hanging from a peg. A life interrupted. Through a grimy window, I saw their silhouettes moving against the snow-covered landscape. One of them carried a lantern but held it low, its light a small controlled circle on the ground. Another had the unmistakable shape of a rifle slung over his shoulder. My horse Silas was tied to a post behind the cabin. If I could just reach him. I slipped through the house, my feet finding the quiet spots on the creaking floorboards. The back door was swollen shut from the damp, and I had to put my shoulder into it, praying the noise wouldn't give me away. It finally gave with a groan that sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silent night. Silas snickered softly as I approached. I whispered to him, my words lost in the rising wind as the storm began to gather its strength. I was fumbling with the frozen knot of his reins when a voice, calm and deadly, cut through the night. "That's far enough, friend." I froze, my foot halfway to the stirrup. The voice came from the darkness by the corner of the barn. It was smooth, almost conversational, but it held the chilling authority of a man holding a gun. "Turn around, slowly, and let's see those hands." I turned. 3 men stepped out of the shadows, their forms dark and menacing against the white snow. The man in the center was tall and thin, dressed in a black duster that seemed to absorb the faint light. His face was all sharp angles and shadows under a wide-brimmed hat. The 2 men flanking him held rifles, both leveled directly at my chest. "Name's Silas Kane, the tall man," said his voice, the one I'd heard. "My associates and I have a vested interest in this particular piece of property. An interest you've just trespassed upon." "I'm just passing through," I said, my voice sounding thin and unconvincing even to my own ears. "Found the place abandoned, looking for shelter from the storm." Kane smiled, a bloodless twitch of his lips. "Oh, I think we both know your visit is a bit more involved than that. We've been watching this ranch since Mr. Thorne had his unfortunate accident. Just waiting for the next poor curious soul to come digging where he shouldn't." One of his men, a burly man with a thick beard and a cruel glint in his eyes, stepped forward. "Check his pockets, Silas. I'd wager they're heavier than they were this morning." The weight of the coins suddenly felt like an anchor dragging me down into a grave I had dug for myself. They knew. They'd known all along. "The coins aren't the real prize, are they?" I said. The words from Elias's journal giving me a strange, reckless courage. "They're just bait." Kane's smile widened. A very perceptive man. Much sharper than Thorne, I'll give you that. He figured it out as well, but his revelation came a little too late to do him any good. "What did you do to him?" "The same thing that will happen to you if you fail to cooperate," Kane said smoothly. "You see, Mr. Stone, this territory holds secrets. Secrets that powerful men pay a great deal to keep buried. Secrets worth far more than a pocketful of antique gold." The bearded man raised his rifle slightly. "Let's just end this here, Silas. He knows too much." Kane held up a gloved hand. "Patience, Gideon. Mr. Stone here might prove to be a reasonable man once he fully appreciates the gravity of his situation. My mind raced. They knew about the coins. They likely knew about the box. But did they know about the journal? Did they know about the message in the well? My only hope was that Elias had been one step ahead of them. What sort of cooperation are we talking about? I asked, buying time, my gaze darting into the darkness, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Kane reached into his duster and produced a folded document. A simple land transfer. You sign over your claim to this property, you hand over anything you found in that well, and you forget you ever set foot in this valley. You ride east and never look back. I stared at the paper. It was a legal document stamped and sealed. They weren't just thieves. They were trying to create a legitimate claim to this cursed land. Why go to all this trouble? If you want the ranch, why not just buy it legally? Kane let out a short, dry laugh. Because Mr. Stone, legality is a messy business. When a man like Elias Thorne vanishes, he leaves behind creditors' legal entanglements. It could take years for the property to be settled. But if a new homesteader such as yourself were to legally claim it and then willingly sell it to our silent partners, it tidies things up considerably. And if I say no? The third man, who had been silent until now, spoke for the first time. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. Then you'll vanish just like Thorne and the carvers before you. Another poor soul lost to the harsh Wyoming winter. My hand twitched, wanting to reach for the journal inside my coat for the proof of their evil. I stopped myself just in time. You murdered them. We solve problems. Kane corrected, his voice dangerously soft. Thorne was a problem. He found the coins, and instead of taking his windfall and leaving, he got greedy. He started asking questions about where the coins came from, who was leaving them, and for what purpose. The pieces clicked into place, forming a dark and terrible picture. The coins weren't treasure. They were payment. This isolated ranch was a drop point, a clandestine bank for some vast criminal enterprise. What purpose? I pressed. Kane's eyes glittered in the darkness. The kind of purpose that involves moving certain high-value assets across the border without the tiresome interference of federal marshals. The kind of enterprise that has made our employers very wealthy and very motivated to protect their investment. Smuggling. A vast organized conspiracy. Elias Thorne hadn't just stumbled upon a pot of gold. He'd stumbled into a nest of vipers. And in my desperate attempt to find a foothold in this world, I had followed him right down into the pit. And then I made my mistake. A fatal slip of the tongue born from the terror and the frantic connections firing in my brain. The old Spanish mission, I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. The smile on Silas Kane's face evaporated. The air grew thick with a sudden lethal tension. What did you just say? He hissed, his voice dropping an octave, losing all its polished calm. I had just signed my own death warrant. They didn't know about the message in the well. They didn't know about the second hiding place. But now they knew that I did. The bearded man Gideon cocked his rifle, the sound echoing in the frigid air. He knows the drop site, Silas. He knows everything. Where Kane snarled, taking a step toward me, his hand dropping to the butt of a pistol holstered at his hip. Did you hear about the mission? The silence that followed my blunder was heavier and colder than the stone in the well. Kane's eyes, barely visible under the brim of his hat, bored into me, trying to peel back the layers of my lie before I could even construct it. I must have misheard something, I stammered, my mind scrambling for a plausible retreat. In Cheyenne. 2 old prospectors in a saloon talking about this area. Mentioned a ruined mission, just a landmark, that's all. Kane took another slow, deliberate step forward. The snow crunched under his boot. No one talks about the mission, Mr. Stone. No one even knows it exists, save for a handful of individuals. 2 of whom are my associates and the third is me. He paused, letting the implication hang in the frozen air. Which means you found something else down in that well. Something more than just coins. Gideon spat on the snow. He's lying through his teeth, Silas. Let's finish it. Search him, Kane commanded, his voice flat and hard as iron. Every pocket. And this time be thorough. Gideon moved toward me, his rifle held loosely in one hand. But just as he reached out, a new sound cut through the night, a low rhythmic jingle of harnesses and the crunch of heavy wagon wheels on snow. Headlights, 2 bright circles of yellow, pierced the darkness from the direction of the main trail. All 4 of us froze. Kane let out a string of curses under his breath. Our employer. He's early. Get him out of sight, now. The gravelly-voiced man grabbed my arm in a grip like a vice and hauled me toward the dark maw of the leaning barn. "One sound out of you," he growled in my ear, "and I'll put a bullet through your spine." He shoved me into the freezing darkness of the barn, the air thick with the smell of old hay and decay. Through a crack in the warped wooden wall, I could see the scene unfolding in the yard. The wagon, a heavy-duty freight wagon pulled by 4 stout horses, rolled to a stop. A man descended from the driver's seat. He was dressed not like a frontier ruffian, but in a fine tailored city coat and a bowler hat. Even from a distance, he carried an aura of wealth and absolute authority. This was the man pulling the strings. Kane walked out to meet him. "You're ahead of schedule, Kane," said his tone respectful but tense. There are whispers in Cheyenne. The man's voice was clipped and educated, entirely out of place in this wilderness. Federal marshals are getting curious about certain shipping manifests. We're moving the timetable up. Is the payment secured? We have a complication, Kane said, gesturing vaguely toward the barn where I was hidden. Another scavenger found the well. The well-dressed man didn't even turn his head. His voice was as cold as the wind. Then handle it. The same way you handled Thorne. There can be no loose ends. Not with this shipment. He may know more than Thorne did. Kane pressed. He mentioned the mission. I saw the man's shoulders tense. He turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping across the dark ranch. That is not possible. How? We're about to find out, Kane promised. Do so, the man ordered. Get what you can from him. Then make sure his body is at the bottom of that well with a story about a tragic accident. I'll unload the cargo. You have 1 hour. As the man turned back to his wagon, my jailer shoved me deeper into the barn. You heard him, he rasped. Your time is running out. Best start talking. My mind was a whirlwind of terror and desperate calculation. 1 hour. They would torture me, find the journal, and then kill me. My only chance was to escape before Kane and Gideon came for me. The barn was my cage, but it was also my only hope. It was filled with the detritus of a failed farm, old tools, rotten harnesses, stacks of frozen hay bales. The man stood silhouetted in the doorway, watching his partners. His attention was divided. It was now or never. My eyes darted around the cavernous space, and I saw a hayloft ladder leading up into the blackness. High above a small door for loading hay was likely my only way out. I had to create a diversion. My eyes landed on a pile of old rusted metal, a broken plowshare, some chains, a bucket. Taking a deep breath, I kicked it with all my might. The resulting crash was an explosion of sound in the tense silence. The man spun around, rifle raised. What was that? In that split second of his distraction, I lunged for the ladder. I scrambled up, my frozen fingers slipping on the icy rungs. He cursed and fired the shot, splintering the wood just inches from my head. I didn't look back. I hauled myself into the loft, plunging into the darkness. I could hear him climbing after me, his heavy breathing filling the space below. I crawled frantically across the loft floor, the hay crackling under me, searching for the loading door. My hands found the wooden bar that held it shut. It was frozen solid. I could hear him reach the top of the ladder. I threw my shoulder against the bar, grunting with effort. It wouldn't budge. I pulled the heavy hunting knife from my belt and began hammering at the bar with its pommel. Wood splintered. The bar groaned. A shape rose from the ladder opening. I saw the glint of his rifle barrel. I gave the bar one last desperate blow. It cracked and the door swung open with a screech, revealing a vertiginous drop to the snow-covered ground 15 feet below. Without a second's hesitation, I dove out into the freezing night air. I hit a deep snowdrift with an impact that drove the air from my lungs. For a moment, the world was a silent white explosion. Then the shouts from the barn brought me back. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the searing pain in my ankle. I was behind the barn, out of their immediate line of sight. Silas was still tied up behind the cabin. Gunshots rang out as I sprinted across the open ground. A bullet sang past my ear, another kicked up a spray of snow at my feet. I reached my horse, my fingers fumbling with the knot, my breath coming in ragged, panicked sobs. The knot came free. I threw myself into the saddle, not even bothering with the stirrups. He's getting away, I heard Kane roar. I dug my heels into Silas's flanks. The old horse responded with a surge of power, and we plunged into the darkness of the surrounding woods, away from the ranch, heading north. North toward the old Spanish mission. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of men saddling their own horses. The hunt had begun. The storm Nora had predicted had arrived in full force. Snowflakes thick and wet swirled around me, reducing visibility to mere feet. The wind howled through the skeletal trees, a mournful symphony that matched the terror in my heart. I was riding blind, guided only by instinct and the North Star, which was now completely obscured by the blizzard. The cold was brutal, a physical enemy that clawed at my exposed skin. My flight from the barn had left me without a hat or proper gloves. My ears and fingers were already numb, aching with a deep burning pain. But the fear was a fire in my belly, keeping me moving, pushing me onward. Behind me I could hear them. The occasional shout, the thud of hoofbeats muffled by the snow. They knew the land better than I did. They were closing in. I pushed Silas harder, weaving through the trees, praying for a miracle. My ankle throbbed with every movement of the horse, a sharp, insistent agony. After what felt like an eternity of desperate blind flight, I saw it through a brief lull in the swirling snow. A dark shape against the white landscape. A silhouette of crumbling stone walls, barely visible, the ruins of the old mission. I slid from Silas's back, my legs nearly buckling under me. Leading him into the relative shelter of the ruined walls, I searched frantically. Elias's note had said to look for a stone marked with a cross. In the darkness and the driving snow, it was an impossible task. Hoofbeats close now. They were at the edge of the clearing. I was out of time. I ran my hands along the icy stones of what must have been the northern wall, my numb fingers searching for any irregularity. My hand snagged on something. I wiped away the snow. There it was. A simple cross crudely carved into the stone. The stone was large, set deep in the foundation. It wouldn't move. I remembered the journal from the box still tucked inside my coat. I pulled it out and fumbled with the clasp. Inside the front cover, tucked into a leather sleeve, was a small flat piece of iron. A lever. Elias had left me the key. I jammed the lever into a crack beside the stone and put all my weight on it. The frozen earth groaned in protest. Then, with a grating sound, the stone shifted. It moved inward, revealing a dark, hollow space behind it. Just as the hoofbeats entered the ruins, I reached inside and pulled out a heavy oilcloth-wrapped parcel. Nowhere left to run stone. Silas Kane's voice was right behind me. I turned the parcel clutched to my chest. He and his 2 men had me cornered, their horses forming a half-circle around me. Kane sat calmly on his horse, pistol in hand, a look of triumphant finality on his face. "You've led us on quite a chase," he said. "But it ends here. Hand over the package." This was it. The end of the line. I was cold, exhausted, and cornered, but as I looked at the smug certainty on his face, a different kind of fire ignited within me. Not fear, but rage. A cold, clear fury for Elias Thorne, for the Carvers, for myself, for the life that had been stolen from me. "It's over for you, Kane," I said, my voice steady despite the chattering of my teeth. "This package, it's a full accounting. Ledgers, names, dates. Everything. Your entire operation, from your paymasters in Cheyenne to the smugglers on the border." Kane laughed. "Dead men can't testify, Stone. And those papers will burn quite nicely." Maybe I said, playing the only card I had left. It was a desperate, wild bluff, a shot in the dark. But before I rode out here tonight, I left a package of my own with a friend. A copy of Elias Thorne's journal. I told him if I wasn't back in town by dawn, he was to take it directly to the U.S. Marshal's office. He has my signed testimony naming you your men and describing this mission. Killing me now won't save you. It will only seal your fate. I held his gaze, pouring every ounce of conviction I could muster into my eyes. I prayed he couldn't see the lie, the sheer terrified invention of it all. The silence stretched, broken only by the howling of the wind. Kane's eyes narrowed, searching my face. Gideon shifted impatiently on his horse. "He's bluffing, Silas. Let me shoot him." But I saw a flicker of doubt in Kane's eyes. He was a businessman, a man who calculated risks. He was weighing the certainty of my death against the possibility, however, small, of my story being true. If I was lying, he would win. But if I was telling the truth, killing me would unleash the very forces he had spent years avoiding. "What do we do?" the gravelly-voiced man asked, his rifle wavering slightly. Kane stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. The entire world seemed to hang in the balance of his decision. Finally, he lowered his pistol and slowly, deliberately holstered it. "The shipment is lost," he said, his voice tight with fury and resignation. "This entire outpost is compromised." He looked at his men. "We burn the ranch and ride south. We disappear. The operation is finished." He turned his cold gaze back to me one last time. "You may have won this battle, Mr. Stone, but men like our employer have long memories. I'd watch your back for the rest of your days." Without another word, they wheeled their horses around and galloped away, their forms quickly swallowed by the swirling snowstorm. I stood there in the ruins of the old mission, shaking uncontrollably from cold and relief, clutching a bundle of papers that held the truth. I had faced the ghosts of Blackwood Creek and survived. I was alive. And for the first time in a long, long time, I had something to fight for. 3 months later, the spring thaw had come to Wyoming. The plains were awash in the tender green of new life, and Blackwood Creek, no longer frozen, gurgled cheerfully on its way to the river. The documents I'd recovered from the Mission Foundation had been an earthquake that shook the territory to its core. The investigation, led by a determined U.S. Marshal, had resulted in the arrest of over a dozen men, including a territorial senator and 2 senior customs officials. The well-dressed man from the wagon was now facing a federal trial. Kane and his men had vanished ghosts in the wind, but their empire had crumbled into dust. The territorial government, eager to put the scandal behind them, had officially awarded me the deed to the ranch, along with a substantial reward for my role in exposing the conspiracy. The curse of the land had been broken, its darkness brought into the light. The first thing I did with the money was buy a train ticket to Ohio. When I stepped onto the platform and saw Sarah and my 2 children waiting, their faces a mixture of hope and uncertainty, it felt like my heart, frozen for so long, had finally begun to thaw. I told her everything, and as she listened, I saw the doubt in her eyes melt away, replaced by the same love and pride I had feared I'd lost forever. We returned to Wyoming together. The children's laughter now echoed in the valley where only the wind had howled before. We rebuilt the old cabin, making it strong and warm. We mended the fences, cleared the fields, and planted our first crop. The ranch, once a symbol of my desperation, had become a testament to our resilience. Sometimes in the quiet of the evening, I walk out to the old well. Its stones are now warmed by the sun, and wildflowers grow around its base. It still holds water, clear and cold and sweet. The gold coins, long since turned over as evidence, are gone. But what I found in those dark, frozen depths was something far more precious than treasure. I found the truth. I found justice for the men who had died here, and in the heart of that brutal, unforgiving winter, I found my way back to the life I was meant to live. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.